Hi, my name is Martin Zelaus, and this presentation is about designing game core mechanics. To be simple, core mechanics means game rules. But because game rules are a complex set of game objects, events, and conditions between them, we use term core mechanics, and rules are only one part of them. So, core mechanics are game data and algorithms that describe the game rules and the internal operations. The design of game core mechanics consists following steps. First, structure your game. Next, describe your game resources and objects. Define relationships between objects. Define events related with objects. Define conditions for the objects and events. And if the game requires, specify the global mechanics for the entire game. For describing the game structure, you can do following things. First, you can decide what is the player going to do in your game. This part we covered already in the gameplay. Then you can describe the game structure with the flowboards. You can list gameplay modes. You can write the general outline for the story. You can list your game characters. You can draw general plans for levels. You can write progression for the levels. You can define victory or losing conditions. And finally, you can decide what non-play actions can be done. For example, here you can see the structure for the Time Mesh game, World War II scenario, Paris scene, how the different game areas are located and connected with each other, and how the characters are located in the game area. Resources are numeric game objects, different materials and quantities that change during the game. For example, things that can be collected in different amounts, like money, ammunition, popularity, and so on. If games are based on resources, it is also important to define what are the rules, how those resources are created, used, traded, and destroyed. Objects are like nouns, for example, characters, buildings, animals, and so on. Objects are instances of resources. They can be simple objects, specified by single value, or composite objects, specified with several values, like different variables, different attributes, or by sub-objects. Values can be based on numbers, numeric objects, or on symbolic states, symbolic objects. The most common state is, for example, on or off. Some games, for example adventure games, have unique objects, only one object per resource. Here you can see the list of game objects for the Time Mesh history game, World War II Paris scene. All of them are unique. Also, some conditions are presented. For example, where the character is located, what items belong to what character, and so on. How the game resources and objects are related to each other. How the state of one object can be affected by the state of another object. Those relationships can be based on numbers and on mathematical equations. For example, 50 breads can be produced from 1 sack of flour and 1 bucket of water. Or they can be based on symbolic states. Those states are stored in the table. It requires definitions for different stages and relations among stages. The easiest state is binary state, a flag. For example, something is activated when the avatar has entered to the room. Event is a change triggered by the conditions. Something happens, something changes. For example, picking up the key will open the door. And processes are sequences of events. Conditions are circumstances that affect objects or events. For example, object can be affected by the event. Or for example, event can be triggered by the object or based on its attributes. Conditions also define how the object behaves and what the player can do with the object. For example, here you can see the conditions between game backgrounds in the Time Mesh history game World War II Paris scene. For example, player can't enter to the cafe if she has not talked with non-player characters on the right street. Or for example, player can't enter to the basement if she has not collected the clue from the top of the Eiffel Tower. Here you can see the conditions between the characters in the Time Mesh history game World War II Paris scene. The goal of the scene is to get instructions from the spy, but before the player reaches to the spy, she has to communicate with other non-player characters. Basically, the game starts from the soldiers. The barman wants his radio back. The ex-banker wants food. The ex-banker gives a watch to the player. The officer wants to have the watch, but not the simple watch, but the golden watch. Then the prisoner is released. The prisoner gives a sign to the player. The sign should be delivered to the member of resistance, and the member of resistance gives a clue to the player that they're in the basement there is a spy. But this is not so trivial. For example, soldiers don't start communicating with the player before she has talked with barman and finds out that the barman wants his radio back. But for example, player can't enter to the cafe before she has talked with the officer and prisoner, and so on. And finally, you have to decide what is the global mechanics for the game. Some global mechanics are related with the gameplay. For example, losing conditions. For example, if the player gets killed, the game is over. Some global mechanics is not related with the gameplay. For example, saving the game. The content of this presentation is from the Ernst Adams book, Fundamental of Game Design. The examples in this presentation are from the Time Mesh history game.